Boa tarde a todos. Meu nome é Pablo Ibáñez, formo parte de Barleywood. Depois da conversa entre a Jara Rocha e Manufactura Independente, a Ana Isabel Carballo e o Ricardo Lafuente, começamos a continuação a sessão entre Mary Maggic e Miriam Simun, o último evento online de Caring Assemblies Designing for Better Futures, que, como sabem, é um pequeno programa público online que procura interrogar o design, a arquitectura e as práticas espaciais como dispositivos de exclusão e pensar colectivamente como construir futuros mais justos. É uma atividade satélite da Porto Design Bienale. Amanhã vamos ter também a última sessão, a única que vai ter lugar fisicamente no Porto, o workshop Mapeando Futuros Próximos no Instituto, e ainda temos alguma vaga. Se quiserem se inscrever, podem nos enviar uma mensagem pelas nossas redes ou ao nosso mail. Quando estávamos a pensar como construir este programa público a volta das potencialidades do design, gostávamos de imaginar máis escalas além dos nosos interesses e campos de traballo habituais como arquitectos. Depois da presentación da Jara e os Manufactura Independente, a volta do reparto do tecnológico e das políticas digitais, tamén pensar como é posible diseñar ou transformar o propio cuerpo, non só como noso territorio. Esa liña do traballo e a volta do biohacking é un campo moito relevante e urgente para entender e responder ás cuestións culturais, aos regimes tecnológicos e somáticos presentes, e non podíamos nos esquecer neste programa. O traballo de Mary Maggic e Miriam Simun é unha mostra increíblemente potente e non podemos estar máis agradecidos pela súa participación. Mary Maggic é unha artista non binaria que traballa nas intersecções confusas do hackeamento transfeminista, as políticas do corpo e do género e as eco-alienations. Os proxectos máis recentes de Mary, Open Source Estrogen, geran protocolos do-it-yourself para extracción e detección de hormônios de corpos e ambientes, demostrando o seu potencial para aumentar a autonomía corporal. A Miriam Simun traballa na intersección entre ecologia, tecnologia e corpo, e súa práctica abrange varios formatos, incluindo vídeo, a performance, a instalação, a escrita ou experiências sensoriais. A principal preocupação é a colisão de corpos humanos e não humanos com tecnoecossistemas em rápida evolução. I move to English now. Miriam, thanks very much for joining us today and being so generous, sharing your work and ideas with us in this small and humble public program. I'll let you all with Mary's presentation. That will be the first part of the event, and Miriam and I will come back in a bit for the later conversation. Hope you enjoy it, and thanks again for joining us.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you to the organizers for hosting this event. My name is Mary Maggic, and also thank you for the introduction. I'm an artist now based in Vienna, and today I want to talk about how and why and what and why we live in the estro world. So when I started my research in 2015, I was really thinking about these biopolitical questions about hormones. So specifically looking at estrogen first, the first thing I asked myself was, well, what exactly is estrogen and how is it defined in our chaotic modern contemporary world? So the first thing I did was I Googled estrogen, and I typed it into Google image search. And the images that popped up were really interesting because a lot of them kind of pertain to like femininity and like larger breast size, clearer skin, larger ass, and also lots
Mary?
of pharmaceutical products like birth control. Yeah.
I think we're not seeing your presentation, so I can hear you, but
Oh,
I
you
think we're
don't
not
see it?
seeing your presentation, so maybe without the full screen we can
I
see
thought
it.
I
But
shared my...
now we
Ah,
can see it.
okay, so then now you can see it. Okay, so I don't full screen it.
Okay, perfect. Thanks.
So now you can see it, right?
Yeah,
Okay,
perfect.
cool. So, right, so then here are all the images that I found on Google image search. So you can see that a lot of the images are related to femininity and the pharmaceutical industry, birth control pills, hormone replacement pills, some pills for menopausal symptoms. So this kind of gave me an idea of how we how we form our relationship with hormones is primarily through pharmaceutical industry and these kinds of like notions of binary gender. And as I started to research my project even further, I realized, that there's so many molecules in the environment in this world that we live in that are actually hormone mimicking. So all of these molecules that are a product of industrial capitalism, like petrochemical, agricultural, and pharmaceutical industries, these are actually leaching out all these molecules into the environment to the point where it's like all pervasive and no one really has the privilege of being without these molecules or having these molecules out of their lives. So I'm framing this as a molecular colonization because these molecules are ubiquitous. They are distributed unevenly based on pre-existing lines of inequality. You hear about lots of toxic dumping from corporations, dumping onto indigenous lands or in marginalized communities. So the question is, if this is a molecular colonization that we are all part of, not just the human, but also non-human and planetary, then what does it mean to decolonize ourselves, our bodies, and the non-human and the planetary? So just to like go back a little bit, because just to explain what's happening at the molecular level, the green molecule that you see like on the outside, that's the model for an estrogen receptor. And scientists say that this receptor is highly promiscuous, which is kind of a funny way to describe a molecule, but what they mean is that it's the opposite of selective. So that means many different things actually bind into the estrogen receptor. And that's why, all of these products of industrial capitalism, we didn't really intend for them to communicate to our receptors, but they actually do, which I think is one of these big paradoxes of living in the Anthropocene, is that, we didn't intend for these molecules to be part of our shared semiosphere, but they are. And the molecule in the middle, that's the black one, that is estrogen. We actually produce natural estrogens in our bodies. So many other organisms, basically the entire animal taxa, we all share the same estrogen receptor, and that's why we all produce these natural estrogens. So it's really interesting, this promiscuous element of the estrogen receptor, and that being the main reason why we're facing this molecular colonization. So these molecules, they have lots and lots and lots of different effects, not only reproductive effects. So, for example, the effects range from physiological. So you hear about early onset puberty, or men's sperm count has dropped by 50%, and that's a statistic for Europe. I'm not sure about the rest of the world. But then you also have these like neurological effects like mood swings and lower IQ and ADHD and autism. And then you also have really, really serious cancers like cervical cancer, testicular cancer, and stuff like that. So the effects are they can be quite rough. I mean, Donna Haraway put it as some species shift easier than others, and that's definitely true because you hear all these stories about frog and fish and bird populations just like beat out, can't handle a molecule. And so, but then you also have bacteria that are evolving in like a toxic waste site, and now they're able to digest plastic. So there are many different stories of doom, of apocalypse, but then there's also many stories of survival. So I'm just going to point to this quote: "Just as the body can also be reclaimed." So now I'm just going to shift gears and talk about the kind of hormone hacking practice. So in 2014, I was introduced to an online community called Hackteria. And from this online community, I really started to practice as like a biohacker, amateur, estrogen geeking person, freak science person. But I would say that public amateurism is the term that I like the most, because it's actually a term from Claire Pentecost, who is an artist and collaborates with Critical Art Ensemble. And it basically means the act of learning, doing, and failing in the public sphere, and kind of learning without a hierarchy of like expert and layperson. So I think that, you know, whenever you're doing science outside of an institutional barrier, I think that itself is a political act, because you're doing things outside of institutional walls. And so it's a different form of knowledge production. And actually the knowledge production is in your hands and not the hands of the institution. So, so I think that's inherently political. And through the Hackteria network is also how I got to know Paula Pin and Clau Kinky from transfeminists. And they're based in Spain for the most part, but we were collaborating a lot together on like DIY gynecology stuff and also this hormone hacking stuff. So they're definitely a really big influence for me. And I want to shout out to Sub Rosa as well, because they were really pioneering the cyberfeminist art scene, and also taking biotechnology and kind of deconstructing it as a form of like, you know, as a consumerist market that's like targeted towards women, or yeah, just like deconstructing all of these like invisible lines of biopower where like all of these human embryo cells are like actually extracted from human, like actually women's bodies. So just like pointing out all of these like lines of biopower that are normally obscured by companies. And then another shout out to Critical Art Ensemble, another huge inspiration of mine. They did a project called Molecular Invasion in 2002. And they basically like reverse engineered Monsanto's soybean crop to make it not resistant. I mean, 2002, this was like a very revolutionary project, because discussion in the US about transgenics was like just coming out, and here they are like hacking Monsanto's crops and doing it in like a public space, like a museum. So it was like a really groundbreaking work. And it also showed that organisms could be hacked and reverse engineered, and that they weren't just these like black boxes you can no longer interfere with as a citizen. So I really like that project. And this kind of like 7-point plan of transgenic production and cultural resistance that they wrote in their book, Molecular Invasion, I got inspired to write a 6-point plan for hormone queering resistance. I'm not going to read the whole thing because it's a lot of text, but feel free to screenshot it. I do want to point out the last one, number 6, because I think it's relevant to today, which is considered the micro-performativity agential power, not molecular colonization, but also of molecular collaboration. So this phrase molecular collaboration is something that it has it has a lot of tension for people when they hear this, because it's like, why should we collaborate with molecules that cause harm to our bodies? And these molecules do not even, like, we didn't even ask for these molecules to be in our presence and be in our bodies. But I'm going to go back to this question later, but just let that like sit in your head for a little bit. So, so what I started out with was I wanted to be able to see these molecules, or at least see when they are communicating to my body. So the first kind of like hormone hacking recipe I was playing with were these yeast biosensors. And it kind of just came to me by accident, because my friend Josiah Zahner, like he just like messaged me out of nowhere and was like, hey, Mary, did you know that there's like this plasmid that you can buy off the internet that codes for human estrogen receptor? I was like, what? Like, that's so cool. So I bought the plasmid and then I transformed it into the yeast. And it's just like regular yeast that you use for making beer. So I transformed the yeast with this plasmid so that they contain the human estrogen receptor. And it's connected to this expression system that they have in a way that the yeast actually turn yellow in the presence of estrogens. So this was like super revolutionary for me, because I could actually visualize the molecular semiosis that happens when the molecules are communicating to my estrogen receptor, or to our estrogen receptors. So the yeast were kind of like extensions of our bodies. You know, they were able to sense these things and actually tell us if something is estrogenic. So this was really, really revolutionary for me. So this is a very low cost detection method. And if you compare it to like these big laboratory machines like gas chromatography mass spectrometer, these actually work really well. Like they have like just about the same sensitivity, and they're way more low cost. If you think about like taking care of yeast, you just have to maintain it and make sure it keeps growing. And so you don't need this big, expensive laboratory machine like GCMS. And here's an example of a mobile lab that I created to work with the yeast biosensors, because I was traveling a lot and doing workshops on the yeast biosensors, and it just kind of came together like a mobile lab where I can like store everything like very organized. And surprisingly, I never got in trouble with airport security, because I was just surprised, because I was carrying like kind of weird stuff. Like I was carrying like this chicken egg incubator that kind of looks like a bomb, and then there's like all of these reagents and solvents that like could be flammable, and then there's like petri dishes of yeast, you know. So everything looked really, really like scary, but I never got in trouble, luckily. And then the next thing that I was working on was more about like how to perform river gynecology, which is like a phrase of just like diagnosing your river as if it were your own body, because I think many of us are like losing contact with nature, or like our connection with like watery bodies. And so I think it's nice to kind of remind ourselves that whatever is flowing in the river also flows through our own bodies. And so so this is a solid phase extraction technique using a kind of like a C18 column. Like inside just contains like an environment that hormones really like to attach to. And those are the columns that you see like in the middle. Here's like a before and after. So this is before the extraction, and here's after. So you can see like from the river sample, there's so many hormones that we captured like in this little tube. So this is like just a form of extraction method to concentrate the sample that you're interested in. And then after that, we worked on this DIY column chromatography protocol. It's actually really simple. It's only 4 steps of like pouring liquids and stuff. But it's really cool because it works really well with urine. So this is from this protocol, I started to work a lot with urine and just like extracting hormones from urine. It's super DIY. Like we're just using silica gel and cigarette filters. Like these are things you find everywhere. And then we didn't have like access to these very beautiful like glass columns that they use in the laboratory. So we just took like a bottle, like, you know, you finish like drinking the night before, you take like an empty wine bottle, empty beer bottle, and you just cut off the top, and then it becomes like the vessel for practicing your DIY column chromatography. So I use this method a lot in not just workshops, but also in performances and also film. So I'll get back to that later. And here's the example of the extraction lab. So you can see like the glass chromatography bottle. And then inside this tin box is like a series of peristaltic pumps for doing the solid phase extraction. I mean, it's not necessary, but it's good to like, it's nice to automate the process because it can take a long time. So yeah, so there's like a mix of like hardware and also wetware in that suitcase. And then the two mobile labs were actually, they were gone for two years, like being exhibited as art objects. So I actually just like made another mobile lab so that I can keep doing workshops. But then these two labs I just showed you, they were actually, they became art objects. And then here's an example of an image of what the hormones look like when they come from the urine. So you can see it's like this brown, like sticky stuff that gets collected after the methanol evaporates. And in my workshops, I like to do like a little smell test with everyone. So like all of us, like we have our hormones and then we pass them around and we just kind of smell them. And most people, they either say, oh, it smells really horrible, or it smells really sweet, like caramel, or I don't smell anything at all. And this really reminds me of how dogs, like when they're smelling each other's asses, they're actually also smelling hormones that are left like after like peeing or whatever. So they're smelling each other's hormones. And then if you think about it, like dogs are also like, oh, I just want to fight with you. I don't like you, or I really like you, and then they start like humping each other, or they just don't care. So I feel like the urine hormones are kind of activating something like ancient or like evolutionary in us, and they're actually working as pheromones once they're outside the body. And so, you know, we know that pheromones are everywhere in the air, like they're being released by plants and they're like influencing the insects. And, you know, so we all have this like huge like molecular semiosphere that's not only contained in our bodies, but it's like everywhere in the environment, in the air and everything. So we are always being colonized. So here's another image of like how the workshops look like, and you can see it's like super messy and there's like broken glass everywhere and like hormones and methanol. And I really like these images because it's like really messy. If you think about how like science is practiced in the laboratory, it's like very clean and very sterile and very white. And like so is the gallery, like so is like a museum space. So I like, you know, these kinds of kind of guerrilla installations that come out of these workshops. I think it's really cool. And then the last protocol I will talk about is becoming with fungi. So this is a pretty new one that I worked with Paula Pin and Ryan Hammond on during a residency in at Hanger in Barcelona. And I'm actually going back there next week to make this workshop with Paula Pin. But basically, we got interested in these like super queer mushrooms that have like more than 20,000 different sexes. And I mean, compared to humans that only have two, you know, so it's like quite queer. And they also are able to break down microplastics and other toxicities because they have these enzymes that they use for breaking down cellulose from trees. So you always find these mushrooms growing on dead trees. And so we were just kind of exploring them and looking at all the different entanglements that they have with like humans and also these industrial chemicals. And we came up with this experiment for kind of measuring the activity of these enzymes using a decolorization method. So we grow the mushrooms on these small petri dishes that have been stained with a blue synthetic industrial chemical that's really bad for the environment. And over time, the mushrooms are actually like breaking down that color. So you can see it's going from blue to like orange. And so this is a way to know that the mushrooms are actually like getting activated and their enzymes are working. I'm going to switch gears now and talk more about some speculative fiction works. So in 2015-ish, like I was really interested in kind of like the cultural intersections or like the cultural discourse around hormones and kind of the biopolitics of that. Because like I did a lot of like scientific research and like hormone hacking, and but then I feel like the hacking also relates to like cultural hacking and like hacking social ideologies of like gender binary and stuff like that. So I wanted to like push it a little bit further with speculative fiction. So is there sound? Like, can I play a video and then will you hear it? So let's try it. So I'm gonna play this video now. Are you able to hear it?
We're not hearing it.
Yeah, the sound works? Yeah?
I think
No?
no.
Okay. How to make sound, or is it not possible? Well, I guess it's fine. I can post the link later to the all the videos are available on Vimeo, so you can watch it later with sound. So I'm just gonna continue now. Maybe I can remove these notes so the images are bigger. Yeah, there, I think that's better. Okay, so that was a fictional commercial marketing these transgenic chickens to women. So the idea is that these transgenic chickens, they make these eggs that contain gonadotropins. And gonadotropins are like a class of hormones that help women to ovulate more frequently. So if women are trying to get pregnant or they're working as like egg donors for the assisted reproductive technologies industry, then this would be a product for them. And it's really inspired by Sub Rosa's research on how women are like chickens and kind of like this domestication of women and chickens and also being like factory farmed animals. So I was really interested in this parallel, and then that's how I came up with this commercial. And it was actually created, shot and filmed in when I was at MIT Media Lab. And then the next kind of speculative fiction film I made was Housewives Making Drugs. And this is a 10-minute video of a fictional cooking show that's run by two trans women named Maria and Maria. And they basically teach the audience at home how to extract hormones from urine. And so it's like a 3-part like show, like there's like commercial break in between, and the whole cast, like the whole audience like gets on stage at the end of the show. We're all dancing and we're all taking shots of these hormones and singing this song. So it's a really, I think, like a joyful film, and it's also kind of offering a vision of, what happens when, trans women are able to just do this in their kitchen. What are the kinds of ethical questions that come up? The idea of putting hormones into your own body as a form of like hormone therapy, it's definitely like it's a form of biohacking for sure. But then there's also like tons of risks that go along with it. And so, and then what does it mean if like we already live in this world that's like filled with toxicities that could interfere with your hormone treatment? So, so this was like a really, really fun project to make. We filmed it in LA and had like a wonderful cast. So I can post the link later so everyone can watch it on Vimeo. But if you just Google housewives making drugs, you'll find it. So switching again, how to live, act, and care in a permanently polluted world. I mentioned before about this kind of like molecular collaboration that that kind of it's kind of like I said, it's like sitting on a lot of tension, because again, like these molecules, we don't consent to have these molecules all around us, but yet they're readily available to hack and to mutate with. So back in 2016-ish, I came across this article that just came out, and basically the scientists were they were just like breeding this species of fish, and then they accidentally created a hermaphrodite species, and then they called it a hopeful monster in the title of the paper. Because technically the fish is able to reproduce on its own because it has both testicles and ovaries. And so they're like, oh, it's a hopeful monster. And then it made me think, well, like, why can't our bodies also be considered hopeful? Because I was doing a lot of research on this like cultural discourse with like toxicities and stuff like that. And I would just come across these articles where, someone would just be writing a blog post, and then they say, yeah, I don't think it's right that the government is putting birth control pills in the water supply because it's like making all the men gay, and we need both the men and the women to propagate the human species. And this is like a way more important thing to discuss than like people crossing our borders, and it's like, whoa, like this blog post has like homophobia, has transphobia, has like xenophobia, like all in the same article. And so when we're talking about like toxicities in the environment, there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of panic, but then a lot of that emotion is misplaced. And I noticed like a lot of the fear and the panic actually comes from the same like patriarchal structures that are defining normativity and defining like what is normal and what is not normal, what is natural, what is unnatural. And so I think a lot of our panic actually comes from this. And then if you look at, the world, the society we live in today, if you look at the way intersex people are categorized, they're considered like abnormal. They're considered like a body that has to be fixed to be either male or female. So this is an image from a book by Anne Fausto Sterling called Sexing the Body. I really recommend reading this. And it really explains like what happens like when a child is born in the hospital, and if their genitals are a bit ambiguous, then the doctors will say like, they'll measure it, or they'll like compare it to like these standardized measurements and say, okay, this baby has to be, we have to perform surgery to make it either female or male. So we have this like medically accepted practice in the US, and it's like extremely violent, and it's just disregarding all the different ways of being that already exist. So again, this is going back to the question of like how to live and act and care in a permanently polluted world, a world that, you know, has all of these molecules that are able to like change our bodies and basically queer the definitions that we already have about what is normal and what is not normal. So this is where like my work starts to move more into like performance, and also like my workshops also start to become more about performance. So I was writing this script, like kind of like when you write like a theater script, like there's like act 1, act 2, act 3. So I call this a 3-step process for living in an increasingly queer world. So step 1, toxicities. You live in an alien landscape that is colonized by hormones. Step 2, semiosis. You are already alien. You have blood, you have plastics in your blood and in your urine, and these plastics are communicating to your cells. So there's the semiosis happening that is actually very alien. And step 3, subjectivities, is asking, do you want to be more alien than you already are? So I started to kind of like structure my workshops and also presentations and also performances based on this script, because it's kind of like a progression towards accepting your own otherness in a way. So for example, in 2017, I started a project called Molecular Queering Agency. And this is a project that it includes like an audio-visual projection of like this animation that plays. Unfortunately, I have it here, but then you won't hear the sound. So you can Google Molecular Queering Agency and you'll find the video. But it's basically, there's an audio-visual projection, and then there's also this performance that is inviting participants to take part in it. And so when participants come and take part in it, they are asked to put on these oxygen masks. And these oxygen masks already contain hormones inside them. So when you put them on, you're basically consenting to the colonization. Because the minute you put them on, you're smelling someone else's hormones that has come from their urine, and you don't know who they are. It's like completely foreign, but you put it on and you smell the hormones, and you accept, you know, to being colonized. And I think this is such a crucial part of the performance, because like I said, like none of us consent to live in this world. We are never asked, you know, to live with toxicities. So I think this is a really important part of the performance. And then later on, we do like this ritual that's like, you know, very simple choreography. And we have like a sample of our urine, and then we pour the urine into the extraction columns. And then, so the hormones are getting extracted like as you pour the urine, and all the urine like goes into this fountain, and it's very like ritualistic and actually like very culty. Like we're basically like a cult, and we're all like representatives of the Molecular Queering Agency. So that's the idea of the performance. And I also use like the same kind of like performance element in workshops. Here is a workshop that I did with Aliens in Green, which is this kind of, we call ourselves like a tactical laboratory theater collective. And it's like, we have like 5 or 6 members. It's very fluid, actually. Like we always like invite different people to work with. So it's not like we have like a set number of members. We're just like very fluid, like a fluid polyamorous constellation. And we just, we do these performances that are more like public interventions, and they usually go on for like 6 or 8 hours. You know, we're just like working with these people, like 25 people, making them like do stuff, like taking their measurements and collecting their urine and making them like chop food because we're preparing like some xenohormone gastronomy in the evening, or like we'll make them like milk their own hormones. Like we have these like contraptions that were made where you have to like pull this thing constantly to like extract the hormones. Like we just make them do stuff. And then there's also like role playing, like we tell them to select like a political ideology about like, you know, it can be like an environmentalist or an eco-feminist or something, and then kind of like act in that role. So we do a lot of stuff to them. And then at the end, we, yeah, here are the images of like the games and the hormone milking devices designed by Spela Petric. And then we have this like climax in the end where we dissolve the hormones back into vodka. And we all ask everyone, you know, do you want to be more alien than you already are? And we take the shots of vodka with hormones. So here's another image of the kind of, you know, we use lots of props, you know, we think about it as like a theater play. So very highly orchestrated, very long process. Lots of care goes into it. So that's kind of where my artistic practice is evolving in, because I work so much with the public, and I like this idea of kind of like abducting them into a performance without them really knowing it. And I think they come out of it with a more embodied experience about, you know, how to be, like how to just like accept your body queering, accept the planetary emergency that we're all living in, and to just come up with new subjectivities after that. You know, that's really the goal, is to, how do we breed new subjectivities and new ways of being in this world that is like heavily polluted. And next, I will talk about a project that I'm trying to get more funding for. It's called Genital Panic. And I was looking a lot at the anogenital distance. We call it AGD. So this AGD has been decreasing over time. So this is the distance between your anus and your genitals. And depending on how much plastic your mother was exposed to, you could have like a shorter AGD, like if your mother was exposed to a lot of plastics or other kinds of industrial chemicals. So this is kind of interesting for me, because it's really like an example of our bodies changing, and like our bodies actually like queering, like deviating from what is normal. So I wanted to make a project about this. So I was imagining like a queer feminist population study on genital normativity that, you know, doesn't come from like the authority of science, but it comes from like this more like anonymous crowdsourced database of like 3D scan genitals. So the whole idea is that, you know, there's an installation of a doctor's office, and you walk into the doctor's office and you see this like pink gynecology chair, actually the one that's right behind me. And you walk in and the doctor's not there. Actually, you're the doctor. And there's a computer screen with some 3D scanning hardware interface thing. And then you sit in the chair and then you scan your own genitals. And then that gets uploaded into the online database. And I purposefully, like I asked people to like enter some data about themselves, like their name, or not their name, but like the age and stuff like that. And I also asked for their gender identity. And this may or may not be the same as their gender assigned at birth, but it could be different for a lot of people. And some people ask me like, you know, why don't I put like both of them, like the gender assigned at birth and the gender identity? And maybe that's like interesting data for like scientists if they ever want to like look at this data. But I thought like, well, this data is not for the scientists, it's actually for us. And I think taking out gender assigned at birth is in itself like that form of like, it's like resisting the patriarchy, you know, because like who cares what the doctor says when you're born and they look between your legs, you know, it should be about you, it should be about your own gender identity. So so I'm still like figuring out ways like to make this more of like queer feminist population study that's like resisting these like patriarchal tools that are like oppressing like non-binary people. And the installation, I've made the installation like several times, but then what I would really like to do is get funding to make the online database. And with this, like I would need someone who's really good at coding and like building like website architecture, like online databases, and who also maybe has experience like working on queer feminist projects. So that's really what stage the project is at right now. So here's a screenshot of like the interface. It just says gender identity and not the gender that was assigned at birth. And here's the installation again. I actually did it as a performance, as like a live genital scanning performance, which is really fun. And I just want to shout out to the artist Valley Export, who is an Austrian feminist artist who created the original Genital Panic, where she was sitting in public, you know, with her dress in like black leather, and she had like a hole in her pants, basically like showing her genitals, and the performance was called Genital Panic. So this is like a part 2 with technology, Genital Panic. Okay, last project, second to last project that I'm going to talk about is a residency, a 10-month residency I did in Yogyakarta, Indonesia. And this is related to like the river gynecology concept that I told you before about like diagnosing the river as if it were your own body. And I was collaborating with a local group called Life Patch, and they do lots of like citizen initiatives on art, science, technology, and they did a lot of like mapping the river before I got there. And what's really interesting about this river is that it actually cuts the city in half, and it's like it runs vertically through the river. And when you talk to the local people, they actually consider the river as a highway instead of like an actual spiritual entity that has like agency and everything. Like they just say like, no, the river is actually a highway for the other spirits to cross, you know, between, you know, these two spiritual kingdoms. We have one spiritual kingdom in the north, which is the volcano Merapi that erupts every 10 years. And then the spiritual kingdom to the south would be the South Sea. So this river actually connects to like a longer river, and then this longer goes directly into the ocean. So when you talk to local people, they're just like, yeah, it's not really a river, you know, it's not really alive. It's just a highway that other spirits travel on to get between two spiritual kingdoms. And it kind of gave me a sense that, you know, maybe they see the river as like other, like separated from them. A lot of the trash that you see in the river is actually like domestic waste. I think a lot of the pollution also comes from like industry and like hospitals and hotels. But a lot of the trash that you visibly see in the river comes from domestic waste. And me and my collaborators, like we were trying to figure out like why do people just throw trash directly into the river? And so there's some kind of like otherness that they perceive like from their bodies, between their bodies and the river, which I find really interesting. I was looking at a lot of like hydrofeminist like theory when I was researching this project. I really like what Estrida wrote about hydrofeminism, which was published pretty recently. And I would look into this if you're interested. But it's just looking at how we're all connected as watery bodies, and how, you know, even though water is a source of life, it's also one of the main carriers of these toxic molecules. And so there is this connectivity that happens, but then it's also like a harmful source, you know, like water is a harmful source. So I also like the idea of using fluidity as a metaphor. Like, how can we as human species be more fluid in our definitions and more fluid in our ways of being? Um, so there's just like a wealth of metaphors that I think comes from thinking in a watery way. And here's an image of the installation that I made from this kind of like river research that I did in Indonesia. So in the middle, you have this like bamboo sculpture that is representing the river that we were researching. And then I filled it with this blue agar and like used the same mushrooms that are in this like in these blue petri dishes. And over time, they're actually decolorizing um, the blue agar. And then the rest of the bamboo sculpture is just like let me see if I can find a better picture. Okay, so the image on the left, like this is how the bamboo looks when I just like poured the agar, everything is fresh, and then the mushrooms like are just growing a little bit. And then over time, like the image on the right, everything gets really like messy and the agar gets very contaminated. You see like lots of microbes have colonized the agar. And then you see that the mushrooms have like completely grown over the petri dishes. And then if you flip the petri dishes to the back, you see like all the blue color has just disappeared. So, so it's kind of like a time-based sculpture in a way. And then in the rest of the installation, you have these latex sculptures that contain all the trash that I collected from the river. And there was a lot. And I was looking for a material that resembled skin, and I felt like latex had this very like skin-like quality. So this is kind of representing the view of the river. Like when you look at the river from like above, you just see like water and like all this trash that's floating on top. And I wanted to take those images and like replace the water with skin, because we are basically connected with all of these things that enter the water supply. And then lastly, there's a projection of a mandala that's constantly rotating. So this is the projection that's in the installation, and it's always moving. And it has this kind of like kaleidoscope effect. These are all images of the trash that I collected, and then I just like manipulated everything into a mandala. And so this rotating mandala, it's constantly making these new combinations, which is kind of what I see happening inside of our bodies whenever, like from all of these consumer products that we buy and eat and consume, like everything breaks down into these smaller molecules, and these molecules create different combinations inside our bodies. So we're always glitching constantly. There's no such thing as a stable body. Whew, okay, almost finished. And then the last project I'll talk about is a project I started this year called the Estro World. So what is the Estro World? Again, using like speculative fiction, I kind of see the Estro World as like a fictional conglomerate of all of these industrial companies, like coming from petrochemical, agricultural, and pharmaceutical industries. And the Estro World is just like everything combined together. And it's like, and wanted to create this like net art piece. So this is an example of the net art piece. Let's see if I can play it. So it's like an interactive website where you have like all of these pop-up advertisements that are basically marketing Estro World products to you. And like Estro World products are everything, you know, they're like pills and like oil and like random plastic crap that everyone buys for no reason. And it's like, and a lot of these products are selling these ideas of like beauty and sterility and purity and like barricading ourselves from the outside world, or like distracting ourselves from like the planetary emergency that we're living in. So I was looking at a lot of these like advertisements and creating my own advertisements that are in service of the estro world. And in this website, like the idea is like you keep like trying to close the pop-ups, but then whenever you close a pop-up, like a new one just comes out. And it's supposed to feel like very overwhelming and like you can't escape the estro world, which is true because like I said, like none of us have the privilege to like live without these molecules. So so that's kind of the feeling. And then in the very back of the website, like if you're able to close the pop-ups, there's like all of this text that's scrolling in the back. Those are the text, like it says purity is not an option in like 25 different languages. And this is actually a quote from Anna Singh, who wrote The Mushroom at the End of the World. And I really like this quote, purity is not an option, because we do need cross-contamination and mutation to survive collectively. And I think since the pandemic started, we are afraid of this. Like we are very afraid to come too intimately into another person's space, you know? So I think, or too afraid to get a virus or bacteria or something. So I think it's a really important quote to end on. Purity is not an option. So yeah, that's the end of my presentation. And thank you so much for listening.
Well, thanks, Mary, for sharing these ideas and practice. I think it's incredible, and not only to see this, how these questions are response to these somatic regimes we live in, but also the formats you are developing through workshops and installations, and these kind of filming fictions that are raising concerns and also are building like a new collective and body imaginaries. We'll now move to the second part. Thank you, Miriam, for joining us for the conversation, and whenever you are ready.
Yeah. Hi. Thanks, Mary. Hi. I love, I mean, like hormones, hacking, trans politics, gender politics, this questioning of authority around knowledge production, decolonization, big pharma. I mean, just like you're like exploding everything together. And it's super exciting. And I need, you know, another 2 hours to ask all the questions that I have and maybe formulate them too. But I guess the first thing I want to ask, and I love, like, I also just love, especially in this time that everybody's just like more online because of the pandemic and everything, and everybody's all with their perfect photos. And I kind of love that you're like in your studio, which has a lot of stuff in it, and drinking your drink and like figuring out your thing on the screen with us. Yeah, I just really appreciate this kind of practice of these DIY, like failing in public politics. Yeah. So I mean, just to start, I guess I really love this quote about the public amateurism, about learning, doing, and failing in the public sphere. And so in that vein, I guess I wanted to ask you to tell me about some of your failures, or one, and how, like how that evolves. What does it mean to fail in public? What do you learn from it? What did people learn? I don't know, like what that looks like and how that evolves, or maybe mutates what you're doing somehow.
Yeah, I think that when we had this residency at during Interactivos in Madrid at Media Lab Prado, so much shit went wrong. Like we we were like figuring out how to like break this glass bottle, and we had no idea how to do it. And then like we would just like break it with a hammer. We were also like setting things on fire. We were trying to figure out like what solvent do hormones like dissolve the best in. And so we had all these different like flammable substances, and like one of them happened to be like, what is it? Something super acidic. It was like sulfuric acid or something. We had sulfuric acid, got a huge bottle of it, and like someone just like knocked it over. And then it was the most horrible like smell ever. And then all I saw was like the floor was actually like steaming. Like it was like burning the floor that it spilled on. And then someone decided to like throw a bunch of paper towels on it, and then all the paper towels just like turned to ash. Like it was like the most like, yeah. So we've had like lots of experiments like go kind of crazy, but then that's also like out of the chaos is also how, like, again, it's like knowledge production, right? Like it's not like a streamlined experience, you know. It's like it's very like messy actually. And if you look like stuff like maybe before we had like bioethics, it was crazy. Like they would just take farm animals and do all kinds of stuff to them to know about like anatomy and to know about like biology, you know. Like they would just like do totally like masochistic things. So I think the process of knowledge production is not, it's not always ethical. It's not always like clean. You know, it gets really messy and it gets really violent too. You look at the history of gynecology; it's very violent. So yeah, there's also like happy accidents, but I think traditionally knowledge production has not been like a super clean practice.
Yeah, I mean, the history, but also the present of science knowledge production is super violent. If still sometimes for humans, but certainly for plenty of non-humans. I kind of love that, this idea that I mean, it's super dangerous, setting things on fire and but like it's real. And I think I think we like to think about these things as like such as decolonization or doing science as like clean and orderly and good and progress and moving forward, but actually the stakes are really real and the shit is really dangerous. And there's something kind of, I mean, it's terrifying for me to be like set on fire, but there's something really like honest and real and necessary, I think, about surfacing that, surfacing that somehow and living it. Yeah. So I guess in the vein of fires, potential fires happening, I guess I'm really curious. Like, I really love that almost every project that you do, there seems to be a workshop associated with it. And it makes me just curious, like how doing public workshops fits into, I'm guessing, your research process. You were talking about kind of like getting people and doing a lot of stuff to them or abducting people. I also kind of love this because I feel like the language, in particular in art workshops, is really sweet and participatory and all this kind of stuff, and this kind of idea of just taking people and doing stuff to them is kind of violent. I mean, in the language, and interesting, and so yeah. I guess I'm curious how you think about that, but also I'm quite curious about how doing these workshops with people informs how you think about what you're doing. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I think that one of my main methodologies is definitely interacting with the public and kind of seeing their reactions. It's kind of like a prototyping process, but like involving people. And I felt like the workshop format was there was always something lacking, I guess. Like it was just too didactic. It was just like me telling them what to do, very straightforward. But then always at the end of the workshops, people are just kind of like, okay, well, I'm still like super scared about the world that we live in, and I'm super scared about my gender, about my body changing. And it just always felt like the workshop was not really over, you know, if like people are still feeling like crap, you know. So when I started collaborating with the aliens in green, like they were the ones who really introduced a lot of this like performance stuff to me. I mean, I was also really influenced by like critical art ensemble and Sub Rosa and this kind of like performing biotech stuff. But we would just like start brainstorming like all these random ideas where like we don't give them any information at all, and like in the beginning, and like everything starts to like make sense as you progress through the performance. And this creates a kind of like vulnerability in the beginning. And when people feel vulnerable, it's kind of like it's forcing them to think more because they're trying to figure out what's happening, you know? Like if you give them all the information in the beginning, and it's like too easy, you know, you have to make them like work a little bit. So it's kind of like making them like putting themselves in like a state of crisis, or like putting themselves like in a state of like not knowing, which is a form of crisis, I think. And and then they do all this like activity, and then they don't know that they're actually like preparing a dinner for everyone, you know, at the end, but they don't know that that's what it's for. And so we're playing with this a lot and working a lot with like affect and like trying to pull emotions out of people. And then also when I started to do like molecular queering agency, I actually just did a performance of this in Zurich last weekend, kind of along the same lines of like, okay, like, hi, welcome to the performance. Like, I just sent an open call. I need 10 people. Like, I just collected 10 people to the performance. And I didn't tell them anything. I didn't even ask for their names. I was just like, here, put on these uniforms and then just like follow my choreography. And they did the urine hormone extraction thing. They had their urine out. They were breathing the masks. And afterwards, we just had like a 1 hour like reflection together, and just like, how did you feel about that performance? And then we just talked and talked and talked about like it just feels so much more embodied. Like everything that we did just feels like, I always try to connect like we would create like a mantra. Like one mantra would be like purity is not an option, and then we'll try to like connect embodiment to that. And this is something I learned from kinesiology, because it's a form of therapy, but like for your body. And there's always like a mantra that your body wants constantly repeated, and then like an action that goes with it. And then somehow it's like activating this new mantra. And so I was incorporating that into the performance. And I just think it's like a much faster way to like reach people and to really like free their minds from this like eco-heteronormative structure that we've all been brainwashed to believe in. And I think the overall goal, like it sounds like I'm like it's a lot of weird shit, but like the overall goal is to neutralize the fear. Because when we're all like stuck in this fear and like stuck in this panic, it's actually the opposite state of creativity. So we're not able to be creative, and so we're not able to come up with solutions. And so I think it's really important to get people out of this state of fear.
So, yeah, I mean, it sounds kind of like what you moved from maybe a more educational model of workshops to like basically getting people to participate in your crazy estro world rituals. And I'm so curious, but at the same time, it makes sense that I think what you're saying is that that you found that people feel safer after like going through this ritualized, embodied way of learning all this stuff, as opposed to kind of being a student and just being told all this information. Is that right? Do you feel like people, I don't know, feel like they have more agency at the end, or a better understanding, or what do you think it is that makes them feel safer?
I like the way you phrase that they feel safer afterwards. I mean, that's the goal, of course. Like it sounds like we're torturing everyone, but actually like we're doing everything with a lot of care and like because I think it's important, like at least I hope that they feel safer in their bodies, because I didn't like, in the beginning, like when I did standard workshops, I felt like people felt less safe about their bodies. Like they felt more like I don't know what to do, like men are feminizing, oh my god, like, so and a lot of it comes from, again, like these like patriarchal structures of like how bodies should be, so it's like, why should we subscribe to this? And so yeah, like making them feel safer in their own bodies, like for sure is like one of the main like goals of these crazy performances.
Cool. Okay, so kind of on that note, I hate that everything has become about COVID, and I actually try to resist that. But seeing as you work with molecules and like coming together with molecules, I can't not ask. Yeah, I mean, like the discourse around the virus, right? There's all this thing about fighting the virus, and there's not been very much conversation outside of, a very specific very academic circle that I've encountered about how do we actually live with the virus. And it seems to me, virus being also a set of molecules. I guess I'm curious what you've learned through the molecular collaborations that you've enacted that maybe can help us figure out how we live with these particular set of molecules. And maybe not to complicate the question too much, but I feel like it's somehow related and something that I just want to know more about. You mentioned, especially in the beginning of your presentation, the role of pharmaceutical companies and kind of big pharma in polluting our environment and in the end polluting our bodies as well, whether through direct intervention or, that it goes in the river and then we end up drinking it, as do the frogs and everybody else. And I keep thinking about, this outsized role pharmaceutical companies are playing in the development of all of our current conditions. And so, yeah, so I guess I'm just curious, in the context of the pandemic, in the context of the vaccination, in the context of, just like a increased both awareness of molecules that are entering our body and that are dangerous or not dangerous to us, and an increased kind of presence of these pharmaceutical companies, or at least visible maybe to us. I think they've always been there. What can we learn from collaborating with molecules in order to kind of move forward through all this?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, I think in the context of COVID, I think living with COVID has more to yourself. COVID, like the way I with stuff to avoid it, like inequality, technology, act to it, like the global.
I think we're having some troubles with Mary's connection with the internet. But we can wait maybe a minute if they can rejoin us.
Yeah.
Yeah, here.
I just got for some reason. I don't know.
They don't want you talking about COVID. Your connection was great until you began to answer that question.
Exactly. It was so weird.
No living with the
Like
virus.
I don't know, they're like listening to me, the NSA listening to me. Yeah, no, but yeah, it's like so many of these countries are like really suffering right now because of these like systemic, oppressive, you know, lines of inequality. So, I mean, I haven't been vaccinated yet. Um, I'm getting it at the end of the month. But here in Austria, I can get tested. Like I get tested like 2 or 3 times a week, and it's for free. And I just get it at the pharmacy, and it's such a privilege. But then my friends in Indonesia, for example, like they are really overwhelmed by like a second wave or third wave, whatever you call it. So so I feel like living with COVID is more about like interacting with these structures. And then also in the beginning, like there was so much like of this biosurveillance going on. And I feel like it's still ongoing. It's just that people have gotten more used to it. And now with these vaccinations, I feel like there's going to be like a divide between like vaccinated and unvaccinated. And like, yeah, it's going to be super problematic. But I don't know, maybe I should hack COVID and come up with some more like cultural resistance projects against these like systemic issues. I don't know. It's really hard. And it's also like, again, like I think lots of artists also felt pressured in the beginning to like make art about COVID. And I think I think my art, like I think COVID like subconsciously does enter my art, especially in my last couple of projects that I did this year were definitely like I felt COVID was like really like seeping into my subconscious, especially with like molecular queering agency. The costumes that I designed were like very much inspired by like we have to cover our faces and like we have to wear gloves and we have to like protect our entire bodies like from the outside world. So I felt like yeah, this was definitely entering my subconscious.
Yeah, I kind of love this. Like you're all orifices covered while you scan your genitals.
Yeah, exactly.
I have one more question. Yeah, kind of to follow up, I guess, speaking about your friends in Indonesia and yeah, people in many, many parts of the world that are going to be suffering from, well, from many things in unequal ways. And it's maybe a little bit of a challenge to you about this idea of molecular colonization and kind of accepting this molecular colonization. Yeah, I have like several questions around that. I mean, so one aspect of colonization, as I understand it, is this like forcing of another's logic, or the violence of forcing of a outside logic onto people or a place. So I'm kind of curious how you think about that, like this forcing of a molecular logic, and also like really raising the question of what does it mean to kind of accept this, knowing that, for example, you know, in certain parts of the world, the environmental devastation that they're facing or the pollution that they're facing because of, you know, because we have like strong protections in Europe, but then we just go dump everything in other parts of the world. Or, you know, we're reforesting and rewilding land here in Europe while we cut down trees in other parts of the world. So yeah, so I wonder what it means to kind of make this call that we have to just accept this reality and kind of embrace it, as opposed to, you know, saying that in fact maybe there's a moment, like where is the space for resistance within that, or how do we kind of deal with the fact that at the same time, yes, like we are facing a level of pollution that cannot be removed, but at the same time we don't want more, and acknowledging that different people in different parts of the world are really facing widely divergent harm from all of these molecules.
Mm-hmm. No, that's an excellent question. And I think that this like space for resistance is very different depending on the context that you're doing it in. When I was in Indonesia for the 10-month residency, it was really uncomfortable, actually. It was really uncomfortable, not because I didn't speak the language at first, but because like how do you even explain queering to like a majority Muslim population that is like doesn't have access to the same language that we have, like that doesn't like everyone lives like pretty like everyone's okay with the gender binary, like they're complacent with it, and like it's like a structure that like a lot of people are not really like willing to challenge the way that in Europe or US or Western culture we're all trying to challenge the gender binary. So and actually I've never done a performance like molecular queering agency like in Indonesia, and I feel like it would have to be like changed a lot, you know, to be able to be performed there. um, so I think that's a really important point that there has to be this level of contextual fluidity with like any project, because yeah, that finding that room, that space for resistance is going to look entirely different in like a different country or different cultural context. Um, and for the reason of, you know, as you mentioned, like because of this widely divergent way that different countries are handling this planetary emergency. So it would be interesting to make a version in Indonesia. Um, Maybe I should try that. But I mean, it's definitely like super hard to try to uh, use the same language and discourse that I'm using here in Europe or in the US. It just doesn't translate, you know, it doesn't translate at all. And even though I spent 10 months in Indonesia, I felt like I only scratched the surface because there's like so much that I still don't understand about the culture. Um, so yeah, it is a challenge, but a very interesting challenge.
Yeah, I'm sure I mean, one of the things I really love is how much you're collaborating with people, and like even your presentation, how many shout outs you have, and this super kind of fluid, inclusive, attributory, collective way of working, and this like real practice of those politics. So yeah, so I have faith that if you wanted to do it in Indonesia, you would find the right people and partners to figure out how to make that river flow.
Yes, hopefully. I'm trying to go back, but it's like impossible right now because the numbers are just like skyrocketing there.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy how much like these particular molecules are dictating the pathways that people are moving at the moment.
Mm-hmm,
Yeah,
mm-hmm,
and also how long it's gonna all be around. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Miriam. I loved all your questions, and it's always a pleasure conversing with you.
Yeah, super cool to hear how everything's evolving. Really excited.
Yeah, we don't want to ruin the party, but the time has run out almost. Would like to thank you again for these fantastic conversations, Mary and Miriam. And we couldn't be happier with the program. We just had four small events, but lots of connections between them and very different ideas and scales, from new domestic imaginaries to new and old more fair work ways of thinking the architectural project, for example, the exploration of technological regimes and somatic constructions that we have addressed today. We'll close tomorrow with a workshop at El Instituto in Porto. And just to close, we would like to thank again the Porto Design Biennale for this wonderful framework. And would like to thank also Aurora Saceta for the website we are streaming on, Manu Alba for creating these landscapes we are now immersed, and Alberto de Miguel for the sound of the videos we are playing. Also, we know July is not a great month to live stream because people are at the beach probably, but all the events are going to be recorded and available at the same links. so everyone can rewatch it whenever they want. And just to close, thanks again, Mary and Miriam, for this wonderful conversation and presentation, and hope we can meet in real life very soon.
Yeah, for sure.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you
Thanks.
so much.
Cool. Okay.